The metal detector's shrill beep cut through the morning chaos of Lincoln High like a knife. Zara Martinez froze mid-step, her oversized black backpack suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Officer Reynolds, the school security guard, looked up from his coffee with tired eyes that had seen too many troubled kids pass through these doors. "Step back, miss. Empty your pockets and try again." Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as she pulled out her phone, a crumpled tissue, and a few coins. The detector remained silent this time, but Reynolds' gaze lingered on her backpack with the kind of suspicion that made her skin crawl. She'd been at Lincoln High for exactly 3 weeks, and already she could feel the weight of everyone's assumptions pressing down on her shoulders. "That's quite a bag you've got there," Reynolds commented, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "What's in it?" "Just school stuff," Zara mumbled, adjusting the straps. The backpack was indeed oversized, a military surplus bag her uncle had given her, all black canvas and heavy-duty zippers. It looked like something someone might use to smuggle contraband, which was exactly why she hated carrying it. But it was the only bag big enough to safely hold what she needed to carry. "School stuff, huh?" Reynolds stepped closer, and Zara caught a whiff of his aftershave mixed with the institutional smell of disinfectant that seemed to permeate every surface of the building. "Mind if I take a look?" Before Zara could respond, a voice cut through the tension like silk over steel. "Oh my God, Reynolds, leave the poor girl alone. She's obviously not packing heat." Brittany Chun materialized beside them, her perfectly straightened hair catching the fluorescent lights, and her designer backpack, a pristine white leather thing that probably cost more than Zara's entire wardrobe, slung casually over one shoulder. At 17, Brittany had already mastered the art of looking effortlessly perfect. From her precisely applied makeup to her strategically distressed jeans that somehow managed to look both expensive and casual, Reynolds backed off with a grunt, but his eyes remained fixed on Zara's bag. "Just doing my job, Miss Chun." "And you do it so well," Brittany replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She waited until Reynolds turned his attention to the next student before focusing on Zara with laser-like intensity. Zara had learned to recognize that look in her 3 weeks at Lincoln. It was the same expression a cat might wear while deciding whether a mouse was worth the effort of catching. Brittany Chun was Lincoln High Royalty Student Council President, captain of the debate team, and unofficial queen of the social hierarchy that governed teenage life with ruthless efficiency. "Walk with me," Brittany said. And it wasn't really a request. They moved through the crowded hallway, past lockers decorated with homecoming posters and college recruitment flyers. Students parted naturally around Brittany, like she had her own gravitational field, while Zara felt invisible by comparison, just another shadow trailing in the wake of someone who mattered. "You know," Brittany said conversationally, "people are starting to talk about you." Zara's grip tightened on her backpack straps. "I haven't done anything." "Exactly." Brittany stopped abruptly beside a bank of lockers, forcing Zara to halt as well. "You've been here 3 weeks, and nobody knows anything about you. You don't talk in class, you eat lunch alone, and you carry that thing around like it contains the crown jewels." She gestured at the backpack with one perfectly manicured finger. "It's mysterious." The way Brittany said mysterious made it sound like a disease. "I just like to keep to myself," Zara said quietly. "See, that's where you're wrong." Brittany's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Nobody gets to keep to themselves at Lincoln High. We're all one big, happy family here. And families don't have secrets." A small crowd had begun to gather around them, drawn by the magnetic pull of potential drama. Zara recognized some faces from her classes: Jessica Wong from AP Chemistry, Marcus Thompson from English Lit, Sarah Kim from History. They all wore the same expression of barely contained excitement. like spectators at a gladiator match waiting for blood to be spilled. "I don't have any secrets," Zara lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Really?" Brittany's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Then you won't mind showing us what's in the bag." The hallway seemed to contract around them, the fluorescent light suddenly too bright, the air too thick. Zara could feel sweat beading on her forehead, despite the aggressive air conditioning that kept the school at a constant 68 degrees. "It's just books and stuff," she repeated. But her voice cracked on the last word. "Books and stuff," Brittany echoed thoughtfully. "You know what I think? I think you're lying." She took a step closer, and Zara caught a whiff of her expensive perfume, something floral and sophisticated that probably cost more than Zara's family spent on groceries in a month. "I think there's something in that bag you don't want us to see." The crowd pressed closer, phones appearing in hands like magic tricks. In the age of social media, every moment of teenage drama was potential content, and Zara could already imagine the videos spreading through group chats and Instagram stories. The weird new girl getting exposed. The mystery finally solved. "Please," Zara whispered, backing against the lockers. The metal was cold against her spine, and she could feel the combination lock digging into her shoulder blade. "Just leave me alone." But her desperation only seemed to fuel Brittany's interest. It was like blood in the water, and Brittany was a shark who had been circling for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. "You know what I love about Lincoln High?" Brittany asked conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of Zara's impending humiliation. "We don't tolerate secrets here. We're all about transparency, honesty, community." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the growing crowd. "So why don't you just open the bag and show us what you're hiding?" Zara's knuckles were white where she gripped the backpack straps, her entire body trembling with the effort of holding on to the one thing that mattered most to her in the world. Around them, the crowd continued to grow, drawn by the irresistible pull of teenage cruelty dressed up as curiosity. "I'm not hiding anything," she said again. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Brittany smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Zara had ever seen, beautiful and cold and absolutely merciless. "Then prove it." The hallway fell silent except for the distant sound of locker doors slamming and the hum of the ventilation system. Zara looked around at the faces surrounding her, some curious, some excited, some already bored and waiting for something more interesting to happen. Not one of them showed even a flicker of sympathy or understanding. She was completely alone, clutching the only thing that connected her to the person she'd lost. And she knew with absolute certainty that in the next few minutes, everything was about to change. The warning bell rang, echoing through the hallway like a death knell, but nobody moved. They were all waiting to see what would happen next. And Zara realized with growing horror that she was about to become the main character in someone else's entertainment. Her grip on the backpack tightened even more. If that was possible, and she whispered one last desperate plea, "You don't want to see what's in there." But she already knew it was too late. The warning bell's echo faded into silence, but the crowd around Zara and Brittany only grew thicker. Word had spread through the hallway with the lightning speed that only high school gossip could achieve. The weird new girl was finally about to be exposed. Students who should have been heading to first period instead pressed closer, their phones held at the ready like weapons. "You know what?" Brittany said, her voice carrying that deceptively sweet tone that every teenager recognized as the prelude to social destruction. "I think you're right. I probably don't want to see what's in there." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a blade. "But I'm going to anyway." Before Zara could react, Brittany's hand shot out and grabbed one of the backpack straps. The sudden movement sent Zara stumbling forward, her careful balance destroyed in an instant. The bag, which she'd been clutching like a lifeline, suddenly became a liability as Brittany used it to pull her off balance. "Let go!" Zara gasped, her voice cracking with panic. She tried to wrench the bag away, but Brittany had already signaled to her friends with nothing more than a glance. Jessica Wong materialized on Zara's left side, her usually quiet demeanor replaced by the pack mentality that turned ordinary teenagers into predators. Marcus Thompson flanked her right, his 6-foot frame blocking any escape route. Sarah Kim positioned herself behind Zara, completing the circle that had become a trap. "Come on." "Zara," Jessica said with false sweetness, her voice carrying the kind of manufactured concern that made Zara's skin crawl. "We're just curious. If it's really just books and school stuff, what's the big deal?" "The big deal," Zara said through gritted teeth, still fighting to maintain her grip on the bag, "is that it's mine and you have no right to?" Her words were cut off as Marcus reached over and grabbed the other strap. Now she was caught in a tug-of-war, with Brittany and Marcus on one side and her desperate strength on the other. The backpack's heavy-duty canvas strained under the pressure, and Zara felt a moment of pure terror at the thought of it tearing open. "Careful with that," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Brittany interrupted, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the canvas as she pulled harder. "You think you're better than us. You think you can just waltz into our school with your mysterious little secrets and your tragic orphan act." "I'm not an orphan," Zara whispered. But her correction was lost in the noise of the crowd. The hallway had transformed into a coliseum, with students forming concentric circles around the spectacle. Some held their phones high, recording every moment for posterity and social media fame. Others simply watched with the kind of morbid fascination that car accidents inspired, unable to look away from someone else's destruction. "Give us the bag." "Zara," Sarah said from behind her, her voice carrying a note of false reasonableness. "This is getting embarrassing for everyone." But Zara couldn't give up the bag. Not this bag. Not what was inside it. Her fingers cramped from gripping the straps so tightly, and she could feel her palms growing slick with sweat, making it harder to maintain her hold. "I'll make you a deal," Brittany said suddenly, her tone shifting to something that might have sounded generous to someone who didn't know her. "You open the bag yourself, show us what's inside, and we'll call it even. No more questions, no more curiosity. Just a quick peek, and then we can all go to class like civilized people." The offer hung in the air like poison honey. Zara looked around at the faces surrounding her, some bored, some already moving on to check their phones for more interesting drama. Not one of them showed even a flicker of genuine concern for her obvious distress. "And if I don't?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Brittany's smile was radiant and terrible. "Then we take it anyway." As if summoned by her words, more hands reached for the backpack. Jessica grabbed at one of the side pockets, while Sarah tried to work her fingers under the main zipper. Marcus maintained his grip on the strap, his superior strength making Zara's resistance increasingly futile. "Stop!" Zara cried out, her voice echoing off the lockers. "Please, just stop." But her desperation only seemed to energize the crowd. Someone in the back called out, "What's she hiding?" While another voice added, "Probably drugs or something." The speculation spread like wildfire, each suggestion more outlandish than the last. "Maybe it's love letters to a teacher," someone suggested with a laugh. "Or stolen money," another voice chimed in. "I bet it's something really weird, like dead animals or something." Each suggestion made Zara flinch as if she'd been physically struck. They had no idea how close they were to the truth, not about dead animals or stolen money, but about something precious and irreplaceable that they would never understand. The zipper on the main compartment began to give way under Sarah's persistent fingers. Zara felt it sliding open with a soft metallic whisper that sounded like the end of the world. Inside, she could see the careful layers of protection she'd built around her most treasured possession: bubble wrap and tissue paper and soft cloth, all designed to keep something fragile safe from a world that didn't care about fragile things. "Almost got it," Sarah announced triumphantly, and the crowd pressed closer in anticipation. Zara made one last desperate attempt to break free, throwing her entire body weight backward in an effort to escape the circle of hands that held her captive. For a moment, she almost succeeded. Marcus stumbled. Jessica lost her grip on the side pocket, and the backpack swung wildly through the air. But Brittany held on with the tenacity of someone who had never been denied anything she wanted. The sudden movement only made her more determined, and she yanked the bag toward herself with enough force to send Zara sprawling against the lockers. The impact drove the breath from Zara's lungs and sent stars dancing across her vision. When she looked up, Brittany was holding the backpack like a trophy, her perfect smile wider than ever. "Finally," Brittany said, her voice carrying clearly over the excited murmur of the crowd. "Let's see what our mysterious new student has been hiding." She held the bag high above her head, turning slowly so everyone could see it. The gesture was pure theater, designed to maximize the drama and ensure that every phone in the hallway captured the moment. Zara struggled to her feet, her legs shaky and her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "Please," she whispered one more time. But her voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. Brittany's fingers found the main zipper, which Sarah had already partially opened. With deliberate slowness, she began to pull it the rest of the way, the metallic sound seeming to echo through the hallway like thunder. "Let's see what secrets little Zara has been keeping," she announced, and reached inside. The first thing she pulled out was a textbook Advanced Placement Chemistry, worn and dog-eared from use. The crowd made disappointed noises, but Brittany wasn't deterred. She tossed the book aside and reached in again, this time emerging with a spiral notebook covered in Zara's careful handwriting. "Oh, a diary," someone called out, and Brittany flipped it open with predatory interest. But it wasn't a diary, just class notes and homework assignments, written in Zara's precise script. Brittany's expression showed the first flicker of frustration as she tossed the notebook aside and reached deeper into the bag. More ordinary items emerged: pencils, a calculator, a small bag of trail mix, a water bottle. With each mundane discovery, the crowd grew more restless, and Brittany's perfect composure began to crack. "There has to be something," she muttered, her hands now frantically searching the depths of the bag. "Nobody acts this weird about school supplies." And then her fingers found something different, something soft and carefully wrapped, hidden beneath layers of protective material at the very bottom of the bag. Zara's world stopped spinning. "Wait," she breathed. But it was already too late. Brittany's eyes lit up with triumph as her fingers closed around the mysterious object, and she began to pull it free from its careful wrapping. Brittany's fingers worked with surgical precision as she peeled away the layers of protection that Zara had so carefully arranged. First came the outer layer of bubble wrap, which she discarded with theatrical flourish, letting it fall to the hallway floor where it was immediately trampled by the pressing crowd. The students surged forward, phones held high, sensing that they were finally about to witness the payoff they'd been waiting for. "Getting warmer," Brittany announced with predatory satisfaction, her voice carrying over the excited murmur of the crowd. She pulled away a layer of tissue paper, soft, white, and obviously expensive, the kind someone might use to wrap a precious gift. "What do we have here?" Zara felt her knees buckle, and she had to grab onto the lockers behind her to keep from collapsing entirely. Her vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment she thought she might actually faint. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not like this, not in front of all these people who would never understand. "Please," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. "Brittany, please don't." But Brittany was beyond hearing now, intoxicated by the power she held, and the attention focused on her like a spotlight. Her perfectly manicured fingers found the next layer, a piece of silk fabric in pale yellow, soft as a whisper and obviously cherished. She held it up to the light, and even in the harsh fluorescent glare of the hallway, it seemed to glow. Silk? Jessica Wong leaned in closer, her voice sharp with curiosity. "Who carries around random pieces of silk?" "Maybe it's some kind of weird religious thing," Marcus suggested, his tone carrying the casual cruelty that teenagers wielded like weapons. "My cousin's into all that new age crystal stuff." "Or maybe she's just a freak," Sarah added with a laugh that cut through Zara like a blade. Brittany began to unwrap the silk with deliberate slowness, savoring every moment of Zara's obvious distress. The fabric fell away in graceful folds, revealing something small and delicate nestled within its protective embrace. At first, the crowd couldn't quite process what they were seeing. The object was tiny, no bigger than Brittany's palm, and seemed almost impossibly delicate. It took a moment for their eyes to adjust, to understand what they were looking at. Baby booties. Hand-knitted in the softest white yarn, with tiny pink ribbons threaded through the tops. They were so small they could have fit in a teacup, and so perfectly preserved they might have been made yesterday. The stitching was exquisite. Each loop and cable worked with the kind of love that only came from someone preparing for the most important arrival of their life. The hallway fell silent. It was the kind of silence that followed a car crash or a gunshot. The stunned, breathless quiet of people trying to process something their minds weren't prepared for. Phones lowered slowly as the reality of what they were seeing began to sink in. Brittany stared at the booties in her hands, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion to something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The tiny shoes seemed to weigh nothing at all, but somehow they felt heavier than anything she'd ever held. "What?" she started to say, but her voice trailed off as something else fluttered to the ground. A hospital bracelet, yellowed with age and worn soft at the edges. Marcus bent to pick it up, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. He read the words printed on the plastic band, and his face went pale. "Baby girl Martinez," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Born March 15th, 2007. Died March 15th, 2007. The silence that followed was deafening. Students who had been pushing forward moments before now stepped back, as if the tiny booties carried some kind of contagion. The phones that had been recording everything were quietly lowered, their owners suddenly understanding that they had stumbled into something far too private and painful for public consumption. Zara slid down the lockers until she was sitting on the floor, her knees drawn up to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, not the angry tears of someone being bullied, but the deep, soul-crushing tears of someone whose most precious secret had been torn open and exposed to the world. "She was my twin sister," Zara said, her voice so quiet that everyone had to strain to hear her. "Isabella. Izzy." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak across her cheek. "She lived for 20 minutes. The words hung in the air like a prayer or a confession. Brittany looked down at the booties in her hands, and for the first time in her 17 years of life, she was completely speechless. "My mom knitted them while she was pregnant," Zara continued, her voice growing stronger even as the tears continued to fall. "She made 2 pairs, one for me, one for Izzy. Pink ribbons because she was convinced we were both going to be girls." A broken laugh escaped her lips. She was right about that at least. Jessica Wong had tears in her eyes now, her earlier cruelty replaced by something that looked like shame. Sarah Kim had backed away entirely, disappearing into the crowd that was slowly dispersing as students realized they were witnessing something too raw and real for their entertainment. The doctor said it was cord compression, Zara went on, as if now that the dam had broken, she couldn't stop the words from flowing. It happened during delivery. I came out first, and I was fine. But Izzy, she shook her head, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus still held the hospital bracelet, turning it over in his hands like it was made of glass. Why do you carry them? He asked gently, his voice completely different from the mocking tone he'd used earlier. Zara looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen but somehow clearer than they'd been in weeks. Because I was supposed to protect her, she said simply. We were together for 9 months. I was her big sister, even if it was only by 3 minutes. And I couldn't. Her voice broke again. I couldn't save her. Brittany knelt down slowly, still holding the booties with infinite care. Up close, Zara could see that the perfect girl's makeup was smudged, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That's not how it works, Brittany said softly. You were just a baby too. You couldn't have done anything. I know that, Zara whispered. In my head, I know that. But in my heart, she touched her chest, right over where her heart was beating with the rhythm that should have been shared. In my heart, I feel like I left her behind. The hallway was nearly empty now, the spectacle having transformed into something too intimate for casual observation. Only a few students remained: Marcus, Jessica, and a handful of others who seemed unable to leave, as if they understood that they had witnessed something that would change them. I carry her with me because it's the only way I know how to keep her close, Zara said, reaching out toward the booties. They were supposed to be her first shoes, the first step she never got to take. Brittany looked down at the tiny knitted shoes in her hands, and something fundamental shifted inside her chest. These weren't just baby clothes, they were a memorial, a love letter, a promise kept across 10 years of grief and guilt. I'm sorry, she whispered, and the words carried a weight that went far beyond the simple apology. I'm so sorry, Zara. She held out the booties, and Zara took them with trembling hands, cradling them against her chest like they were made of spun gold and starlight. The warning bell for first period rang again, but nobody moved. They all understood that something had broken open in this hallway, something that couldn't be fixed with tardy slips or detention. And in the silence that followed, Zara began to carefully rewrap her sister's shoes, preparing to carry them and her through another day. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Brittany remained kneeling on the cold linoleum floor, watching as Zara carefully rewrapped the tiny booties in their protective layers. First the silk, then the tissue paper, each fold precise and reverent, like a ritual performed 1,000 times before. Here, Marcus said quietly, extending the hospital bracelet towards Zara. His hand shook slightly as she took it, and when their fingers brushed, he didn't pull away. I'm sorry, I read it out loud. I didn't think, nobody ever thinks, Zara said, but there was no anger in her voice anymore, just exhaustion. That's the problem with secrets. Once they're out, you can't control what people do with them. Jessica Wong stepped forward, her designer shoes clicking softly against the floor. The videos, she said suddenly, pulling out her phone. I need to delete the videos. She began frantically swiping and tapping, and within moments, the other remaining students were doing the same. The soft electronic beeps and chimes of deletion filled the hallway like a digital requiem. It's okay, Zara said, looking up at them with red-rimmed eyes. You can keep them if you want. I'm tired of hiding. But Brittany shook her head firmly. No, this isn't entertainment. This was never entertainment. She stood up slowly, her perfect posture somehow diminished, as if the weight of what she'd done had physically changed her. I need to tell you something, Zara, about why I did this. Zara finished wrapping the booties and placed them gently back in her backpack, nestling them among the bubble wrap and ordinary school supplies. You don't owe me an explanation. Yes, I do. Brittany's voice was steady now, but there was something vulnerable in it that none of them had ever heard before. I have a brother. Had a brother. His name was David. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that touched everyone present. He was supposed to be born 2 years before me, Brittany continued, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. My parents don't talk about him. Ever. They act like he never existed, like I was their first and only child. But I found his room once, when I was little. It was locked, but I picked the lock with a bobby pin. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I was always good at getting into places I wasn't supposed to be. Marcus and Jessica exchanged glances, both of them beginning to understand that this moment was bigger than any of them had realized. The room was perfect, Brittany went on, like a museum. Blue walls, a crib that had never been slept in, toys that had never been played with. And on the dresser, there was a picture of my parents holding this tiny baby in the hospital. He looked like he was sleeping, but she swallowed hard. But I knew he wasn't. Zara looked up at her, and for the first time since the ordeal began, there was something other than pain in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. I asked my mom about it that night, Brittany said. She got so angry. Not sad, not hurt angry. She told me never to go in that room again, never to mention David, never to ask questions about him. She said some things were better left buried. But you couldn't let it go, Zara said softly. No, I couldn't. Brittany's perfect composure was cracking now, revealing something raw and human underneath. I became obsessed with control after that, with making sure everything in my life was perfect, predictable, manageable. I couldn't save David, couldn't even talk about him. So I decided I would never let anything else surprise me or hurt me again. She looked directly at Zara, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. When you showed up with your secrets and your mystery, it drove me crazy. Here was this girl who was carrying something precious and painful, and she wasn't ashamed of it. She wasn't trying to pretend it didn't exist. And I hated you for that. I hated that you were brave enough to carry your grief with you, while I was too much of a coward to even say my brother's name out loud. The hallway was completely empty now except for the 5 of them, Zara, Brittany, Marcus, Jessica, and Sarah, who had quietly returned and was standing at the edge of their circle like she wasn't sure she belonged there. David Michael Chun, Brittany whispered, and the name seemed to echo off the lockers like a prayer. Born February 3rd, 2005. Died February 3rd, 2005. Spina bifida. Zara stood up slowly, her backpack secure on her shoulders once again. She walked over to Brittany and without saying a word, pulled her into a hug. It was awkward at first. Brittany was taller, and she held herself stiffly, as if she'd forgotten how to accept comfort. But gradually, she melted into the embrace. And for a moment, they were just 2 girls who understood what it meant to love someone they'd never really gotten to know. Thank you, Brittany whispered against Zara's shoulder, for showing me it's okay to remember. When they separated, Marcus cleared his throat. So what happens now? He asked. I mean, we can't just pretend this didn't happen. No, Zara agreed. We can't, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began to happen at Lincoln High. It started small Brittany sitting with Zara at lunch, not out of pity or obligation, but because she genuinely enjoyed her company. Zara, it turned out, had a wicked sense of humor and an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure movies that made her surprisingly entertaining to be around. Marcus began stopping by their table, initially to check on Zara, but eventually because he found himself looking forward to their conversations about everything from quantum physics to the best pizza toppings. Jessica joined them next, drawn by discussions that went deeper than the usual high school gossip and social maneuvering. Word spread, as it always did in high school, but this time it was different. Instead of cruel speculation and mockery, students began approaching Zara with their own stories of loss and grief. There was Tommy Rodriguez, whose father had died in Afghanistan when he was 12. Maria Santos, whose baby sister had been stillborn the previous year. Even quiet Kevin Park, who had lost his best friend to suicide and had never told anyone how much it still hurt. Zara found herself becoming an unofficial counselor, not because she had any special training or wisdom, but because she understood that sometimes the most healing thing you could do was simply acknowledge that the pain existed. She started a support group that met in the library after school, nothing formal or structured. Just a place where students could talk about the people they'd lost without having to pretend they were over it or moving on. Brittany became her co-facilitator, bringing her natural leadership skills to bear on something that actually mattered. She also began volunteering at the local children's hospital, reading to kids in the NICU and helping parents who were facing the same impossible situation her own parents had endured. The backpack remained a constant presence in Zara's life, but it no longer felt like a burden she carried alone. Sometimes, when the support group met, she would take out Isabella's booties and place them on the table, not as a source of shame or secrecy, but as a reminder that love doesn't end with death, and that carrying our grief can be a form of carrying our love forward. On the anniversary of Isabella's birth and death, March 5th, Zara didn't spend the day alone for the first time in 10 years. Instead, she found herself surrounded by friends who understood that some days are harder than others, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is simply sit with them in their sadness. As she walked through the halls of Lincoln High that day, her backpack secure on her shoulders and Isabella's memory safe in her heart, Zara realized that her sister had given her something precious after all. Not the shared childhood they'd never had, or the sisterly bond she'd always mourned, but something perhaps even more valuable: the understanding that our deepest wounds can become our greatest sources of strength, and that the things we think make us different are often the very things that help us connect with others. The booty still traveled with her every day, carefully wrapped and protected. But now, instead of carrying them in isolation and shame, she carried them as a bridge between past and present, between loss and love, between the sister she'd lost and the family she'd found. And in the end, that made all the difference.